In our last episode, you saw us cut and fit the chine logs into position, and they both fit real nicely, and we've left them in there for a few days, and they're kind of training into that shape. And we've actually got the other one bedded and fastened off already, and I've just left the clamps on over there. We're going to take the clamps off in a few minutes and use those clamps to clamp this side in. But the first thing we have to do is make a few marks down the side of the boat where we want the screw heads to be, or where we want to drill, because we can't just start drilling in any old position. It's got a 10-degree bevel on the top of that chine. If you sneak up too close to the top of that chine, you're going to drive screws out the top of the chine. So I've had to be very, very careful, and this is a little gauge that I've made. It's just taken me a little bit of engineering to get it be exactly right. And now what we're going to do is just put it on the boat like so and slide it along the chine log and put a pencil in that hole, and that'll be the line for the screws that are closest to the chine. And then we're going to make another line up here, and that'll be the screws that are at the top of the chine right there. And with those as a guide, we can be assured that we won't put those screws in the wrong spot. What it is just a piece of 2x4 that I've cut, and it's got a little angle on it there that slides along the top of the chine, and then it's got this void in it so that it won't foul up on the side plank, and especially up forward where the side planking sticks up considerably above the chine. I'm jumping over that to mark it from the chine level on the inside. Now we just slide it along and insert a pencil in those two holes, and we're going to get two nice lines, and that's where we're going to drill our holes for fastening the side plank into the chines. Now that we've got our lines drawn, we're just going to remove the chine and put it over there where we're going to spread the bedding compound on it. Now we're up forward here, and we're going to decide where we'd like our first two screws to be. Once we've got that established, we're going to place a tape measure on that and then stretch it along and make a mark every 8 inches. We're going to continue to make those marks all the way to the transom. That's it. Once that's completed, we'll just remove the tape, and then we'll just sight and make a mark in between those marks on the second line. So what we'll have here is a pattern of screws that's 4 inches apart, staggered back and forth along the length of the chine. That should be plenty to hold that chine right in position. The next thing we're going to do is go spread bedding compound on the chine log itself. Now we're using polysulfide here right out of a caulking tube in order to spread onto the chines, and once we get down there a couple feet, I just pick up a tooth trowel and give it a little drag and just see if it seems to be the right amount for us, and it seems okay. I mean, if you cut the tube off too small, you'd have to make many more beads, or if you cut the tube off too big, you could have a little bit of trouble, but we've got that coordinated. So we're pulling about 3 beads down the chine there, and then tooth troweling it right afterwards. We're working together. Andrew's in front of me squeezing it out of the tube, and what I'm doing is just taking a tooth trowel and spreading it, and we've got the right amount. So I spread it right down the middle, one longitudinal drag, and then I take that same trowel and then drag it towards the edges of the chines just to make sure we've got it all the way over to the edge. Now we've got it spread on the chine log from one end to the other here, and now we're ready to pick it up and put it back in place. We're just going to pick the chine log up now, carry it into position, and bend it in place like we've done before, and start clamping it from the bow end. And we're going to have to force it back into position, back aft, like we originally showed you how to do. And now that we've got that done, we're going to clamp the length of it. And we're going to put a couple more clamps on this side than we did on the first side, because we want the clamps to actually squeeze that bedding to the edges of the chine a little bit easier than we did on the other side. We didn't have quite as many clamps on the other side, so we're learning as we go here. We're also using a couple of vertical clamps here to force that chine into position, because it slides around a little bit on the polysulfide, so we want to make sure it's right where we want it before we start drilling. I want to show you the drill bit that we've been using here to drill these holes for these number 12 galvanized screws. Now, it's just a standard tapered drill bit that you can buy just about anywhere, and the standard countersink for a number 12 is 1/2 inch. That 1/2 inch would have been just too much for me. I wouldn't want to have to put 1/2 inch plugs in a boat like this. It's just too big, and we're not plugging it at all. We're actually going to just putty over the screw heads. And what I've done is I've ground down the countersink quite a bit till it's down around 3/8 of an inch, so that I can get a little bit of a depth to the hole before I drive the screw head in there. That way the screw head doesn't have to compress all of that wood underneath it. I've actually got a nice countersink. It's very close to the size of the head of the screw, and when I drive the head of the screw down in that hole, it looks nice and neat. We're working together here trying to get this thing fastened as soon as possible so that the bedding compound doesn't go off on us before we've got it fastened up nice and tightly. Now, I've been drilling the holes, and I've been very careful to just get this drill bit nice and level and not crooked in any way. And as you push it in, you can't go crooked because you'll break the bit, so you got to be real careful. The bit's not very strong. And as I drill the holes, Andrew's putting the screws in. You'll notice that we've dipped the screw in a little bit of the polysulfide before we put it in the hole, just to provide a little bit of lubrication, and it makes the screw go in a little bit easier. Now, there is a little bit of technique to sinking the screw here. I like to just bump the trigger on the cordless drill because it allows the bit to drop back down in the bottom of the slot if it started to work its way out. The next thing I want to show you here is the screwdriver bit that I'm using. Now, I fashioned it out of a screwdriver bit that was meant for bigger screws, like 16s and 18s, and I've cut the taper of the screwdriver bit down so that it's no longer tapered like screwdriver bits seem to be, and I think they just do that to make them stronger. Well, it doesn't do me a lot of good, so I've ground the taper out of it. I've also ground the width of it so that it's no wider than the head of the screw, and I don't want the screwdriver bit to grind away at the wood as it's driving the head down below the surface. So that's why I've done those two things. The other thing I've done is I've narrowed the screwdriver bit quite a bit so that it drops all the way into the slot of the screw. I don't want it to be hung up halfway down or anything like that. It just isn't going to work. It's got to drop into the bottom of the screw. Now, I've also ground it a little bit hollow on the very end so that the two corners are just a few thousandths lower than the center so that it doesn't teeter back and forth on the center when I'm trying to drive the screw. And I'd have to tell you also that I've put it into a screwdriver bit extension, because when you put that extension in the drill, it keeps the bit as far away from your right hand or your trigger finger as you can possibly get it, and it just makes it very much more stable and much easier to drive. As you can see, you can drive galvanized screws below the surface without ruining the heads. Now, the reason that we use slotted screws is, well, in the first place, they came with a slot. But I find slotted screws to be the easiest screw to drive, especially in hardwood. And if you should mess the head of the screw up a little bit, it's the easiest head to remove. Now, if you should mess up a Phillips head screw, they're very difficult to either get in all the way or even to get out. So we're just going to continue along here, drilling and driving until we get both chines completely fastened in place. And you can see that at this point, the chines are fastened right solidly up against the side plank, and you've got compound squeezing out under and over the top of the chine. That way we know it's down there nice and tight, and it's got to happen kind of quickly, because if it doesn't, no matter what you use for bedding will start going off, and you're not going to be able to get that chine up tightly against the first plank. So the last thing we're going to do here is to cut these first two side planks off even with the outboard side of the transom here. Now, the last thing you'd want to do here is to make a mistake and cut these a little short, because there's just no way to repair it. You're not going to putty it up or do anything. If you made a mistake here, you'd have to move the transom forward to recover. We're not going to let that happen. It's a little bit tedious, and there's some things to do and there's some things not to do. The first thing we are going to do is just take a putty knife and remove that bedding compound that's squeezed out from between the plank and the transom. We don't want that in our way at all. And then we're going to make a little line, a continuation of the plane of the transom on the bottom of that plank. Draw a little line with a pencil. We're also going to draw a little line at the top of the plank so that we can put a reference line on the outside of the plank. So now I'm going to take a handsaw, and I'm actually going to start at the bottom and make kind of like a little fella's notch in there, and then saw down to it from the top. And I'm going to stay to the left of the line, using it for a reference. I'm going to have my left hand kind of guiding the tip of the saw so it doesn't flap around a lot on the transom there. And as long as I stay left of that line, it's going to do a nice job. Now I'm going to continue sawing down from the top until I reach that little fella's notch there, and the piece will come off nice and clean. And once it's off, I can just take a little block plane and smooth it up a little bit. Now we've smoothed that cut up real nice, and we're going to do exactly the same thing to the other side. We're going to cut that plank off, and we're continuing along here with our old man's method of putting this skiff together. And that is that we're going to do all the work right in front of us, where we don't have to climb up on the boat or crawl around or bend over or any of that kind of stuff. The next thing that we're going to do is hang the frames vertically, connect them to the chines and the side planking, and continue on from there.